We're really excited and looking forward to having this conversation with everyone today. Firstly, before we get started, before we jump into the conversation, I just want to give a little update on CCS. For those that do not know us, we are celebrating our 75th year. We are a nonprofit services firm with global reach and local roots. We are thoughtful listeners, enthusiastic problem solvers, dedicated partners. We are collaborators, innovators, and implementation experts. We are believers in your mission and in the power of nonprofits to meet the challenges of the day and make meaningful change for good. And we do that through a variety of ways, a number of different services. Our unique and customized approach provides each organization with dedicated professionals to provide real-time solutions. So while the results of our work are immediate, the impact of our tools and the tactics we develop with our client partners is enduring. I'm thrilled to be the lead of our gift planning practice group, the selection of colleagues you see here on the screen today. My colleagues and I are highly experienced and knowledgeable across sectors, disciplines, and regions. It's one of the values that CCS brings when we work with our nonprofit partners. And we help our partners sustainably increase revenue in the short and longer term with the goal of transforming philanthropy, specifically through the lens of gift planning. So our goals for today, we have 4. The first is to define gift planning. I think everyone has maybe a slightly different take on what gift planning is, so we're going to share with you ours. Take a moment then to look at and understand the philanthropic landscape and the potential. Chart a path forward, the steps that it would take to do that, and then ultimately making the case for greater investment using all of the other information that we've discussed today. The chat is now open, so if you have questions, please pop them into the chat. Some of my practice group colleagues are on as well, so we will hopefully answer your question in real time. If not, we should have time at the end to get to any questions. All right, so first, defining gift planning. So we actually, there's a couple of these terms and some of them can be conflated. We want to do our best to sort of decouple some of them. So in terms of gift planning, we discuss that, we review that within CCS as a culture, right? And specifically, we define it as an institutional commitment to donor-centric fundraising with an expanded focus on non-cash assets. Bit of a mouthful, but essentially when we work with nonprofits, we want to find ways to work with the whole organization so that from the board to the leadership to the fundraisers, that the gift planning is something that just becomes how you operate, how you do business, as opposed to sort of being siloed off to the side. When we speak about planned giving, we think about that as a program, right? It's the third leg of the stool in any strong fundraising effort. You have your annual giving, your major giving, and you have planned giving. And they do need to be equally, hold equal weight within an organization. We also use planned giving to describe the strategy that we would use with any particular donor, be it an individual, a couple, a family. But that's where we can really bring all of our tools to bear. Deferred gifts being one of them, not to necessarily say every planned gift is a deferred gift. Those are actually 2 different things. But that within a planned giving strategy, we're taking into account deferred gifts, as well as different asset types that we can suggest or propose to a donor they might be able to use to make a gift, and also what it would mean for them, right? What sort of benefits would they derive financially and personally in being able to use those assets? So let's take a look at some of the elements within our philanthropic landscape currently and how they're all sort of coming together at a really unique moment in time. So of the 4 items listed here on the screen, my guess is none of these are particularly surprising to you, especially those of you that are planned giving practitioners. But the way in which we are approaching them, I think, will guide how philanthropy changes or doesn't in the future. So we know that the wealth transfer is ongoing. We know that in about 8 years or so, it's predicted that it will hit its peak, both in terms of the amount of wealth that's transferred, but also the pace. So, approximately, trillions of dollars transferring hands every 5 years or so. It's an incredible sum of money moving very, very quickly. Pandemic and subsequent economic shifts and perhaps even instability have caused people to think differently, right? We saw an uptick in the increase of wills. We know that people are more interested in understanding how they as a family or as an individual are prepared for future economic upheaval. And that has then tied into their sophistication as donors, not only in terms of how they are using their wealth, to support organizations, but also the understanding that there's more that can be done with an organization beyond purely giving, thinking about volunteer time and sharing expertise and other ways of engaging. And then nonprofits ourselves, right? We are becoming more sophisticated as well. We have better databases, not that we always know the best way to use them. Our systems are improving. Our practitioners are becoming more and more advanced. I mean, this is now a course of study that students can follow through undergraduate and graduate studies. So everything is just sort of coming together in this moment, which is, I think, really exciting. A few takeaways from our recent philanthropic landscape survey. Hopefully you received the report for this year. If not, the summary, sort of high-level overview will come out early next year for 2023, and then the larger report later in the year. So a few takeaways. The first, you can see there, about 2/3 of organizations felt that their staff were only somewhat or not at all knowledgeable about gift planning. And I would take that with a grain of salt. In our experience, it's not so much that the staff aren't knowledgeable. I think it's more of a confidence issue, and there's ways to address that, right? Certainly through professional development and increased opportunities to put the skills to use, right? So to really start to build up that muscle, flex that muscle. We also know that the majority of nonprofits that took our survey are receiving a huge amount of gifts from donor advised funds, even though there's potential in other assets. So we don't want to certainly ignore DAFs by any measure. We want to make sure that we are expanding the offerings that we provide to our donors in terms of assets that they could use to be created donation relevant to make a gift to our organization. And then slightly more than half of nonprofits expect an increase in deferred gifts in 2023. By comparison, about half of donors are prepared to share that information with you. So that's a gap we need to bridge, right? In terms of the education and the information we're sharing with our donors, and then encouraging them to share back with us when they have actually included our organizations in their estate plans. So a quick note about Bequest in the US, because they still remain one of the most popular ways that individuals will give. And you can see the stats here from the most recent Giving USA report. I also want to point out that there's, the Giving USA Leaving a Legacy report that came out a few years ago now, unfortunately got sort of sucked up in the pre-pandemic and immediate sort of aftermath of the pandemic in early 2020, but some really insightful information that came out in that report. I think the two data points that are most relevant, particularly for this slide, but then as we're thinking about our plan giving programs and making the case to our leadership about why we need to invest, is that the age demographic of donors creating their first will and adding a charitable beneficiary to their will are decades younger than I think most of our board members and our leadership, and perhaps even some of our fundraising colleagues consider, right? So early or mid 40s and early 50s for those two milestones. I'd also add that of the total amount given through Bequest this past year, about 1/3 of it, almost $14 billion, came from estates of less than $1 million. So again, it's not just the high capacity, high net worth donors that can have a sizable impact. It's donors of more modest means as well. So I want to make sure we're taking every effort to, again, to share this information with our donors, make sure it's available to them, and that they understand that they can make a meaningful gift by dipping their toes into these plan giving waters. So those of you that, again, work in this space are not going to be surprised by these graphics from Dr. Russell James. I am personally a huge fan. So helpful, I think, to share, again, just to underscore for ourselves, but also to remind us that it's helpful to know that non-cash assets drive growth in nonprofits. So when we're talking about a plan giving program, I think it's really important that we expand it again beyond just the deferred giving piece of it, but beyond the deferred giving conversation to include these non-cash assets, many of which are essentially cash, but in a different form. We also want to remember relative to the wealth transfer that most wealth is not held in cash. So those two data points together mean that there's a lot of opportunity here for most of our organizations to really, to really dig into plan giving, and the investment and the ROI on that investment could be pretty impressive in a very short amount of time. Also, I think helpful to remember that people are more willing to give from unearned or irregular rewards. So think about appreciated assets or speaker fees or royalties or things like that. So while there might be other assets that we want to think about and ask for from donors, it's important to keep that top of mind as well, because many of those irregular and unearned rewards, again, are cash, but in a different form. And then ultimately important to keep in mind that, about 95% of deferred giving donors maintain or increase their annual giving over time. So that's another important myth to bust with your leadership and within your organization, and one that I think, again, can have pretty significant growth potential for our organizations. Okay. So just going to pause here for a quick trivia break, again, just to underscore the importance of non-cash assets. So we have DAFs, residential real estate retirement plans, as our asset types, and then valuations on the other side of your screen. So feel free to pop into the chat. We'll start with DAFs. Do you believe DAFs are worth 28 trillion, 39.4 trillion, or 35 billion? Okay, we got one choice for C. Anyone gonna go along with PJ, or do we have any other thoughts there? A, okay. B, great, 39.4 trillion. Great. So the correct answer is C, 35 billion. So, a lot of money wrapped up in DAFs at the moment, and likely to continue to increase at an exponential rate going forward. Well done, PJ. All right, second option here, second chance for a correct answer. Residential real estate, are we thinking that's 28 trillion or 39.4 trillion? Let's see if PJ can go 2 for 2. All right, couple of choices for A, got one for B. Okay. And the correct answer is A, 28 trillion. So again, now we've gone from billions to trillions, right? DAFs at 35 billion, residential real estate at 28 trillion, which then leaves retirement plans at almost $40 billion. So it's what I find so fascinating about these particular stats, again, right? The focus so much is on DAFs. They're so important. So many donors are using them. There's many reasons why they do now and will continue to. And at the same time, the amount of residential real estate and retirement plans together combined are almost $70 trillion, right? So just take retirement plans alone. There's 1,000 more value in retirement plans versus DAFs. So just to keep in mind, right, and to continue to underscore for our colleagues, there's a lot of capacity and a lot of wealth out there, but we have to be able to ask for it and to encourage our donors to think about their wealth in different ways. All right, so moving on and charting a path forward. So this is an approach that CCS takes. I don't know if there's any Yankee fans out there today. My husband, I was not originally, but my husband's from New York, grew up in the Bronx, so I'm now a Yankees fan. But I remember, when we first got together, watching Yankee games and watching Mariano Rivera, right, the closer, the Sandman, coming in and just shutting teams down time after time after time. And then I recall seeing an interview with him where he talked about how he throws the ball, his pitch, right, his signature pitch that was just so devastating to so many batters over the years, and how he was so willing and open to be able to share that with anyone who asked. He would show anybody who asked how to throw his pitch. He had no problem doing it. And yet nobody could throw it like Mariano. So not to say that there won't be another Mariano Rivera, there might be, I don't think there will be, but suffice to say, there's a lot of different ways to determine what is the potential within your donor base for planned giving. A lot of different ways to go about it. This is how we do it. We like to think it's the best way, but open to other thoughts about that as well. So the first thing to consider, and again, this is all within the confines of making the pitch to your leadership for why to invest in planned giving. First, have to understand, when is it appropriate to actually do the work, to understand what potential exists within your community. There's a lot of different reasons why. But I would say we want to start to think about, first and foremost, how to leverage any of your ongoing efforts so you can find efficiencies, right? If you're in the midst of creating a strategic plan, it's probably a really good idea to determine what the philanthropic value or potential is within your community to support that strategic plan. Certainly, if you're in the process of gearing up for a campaign, I hope you're doing that work as well. And if not, we should have a conversation about that too. But if you're just simply looking to, shore up your sustainability for the long term, or even in the short term, right? You have some short-term annual or major gift goals that you need to reach. Doing an assessment of your database, of your donors, is going to be critical to understanding what strategies to put in place to be able to maximize the potential, not only for what you can get from your donors, but how you can help your donors, what you can give to your donors, and in more of a reciprocal relationship than I think we typically have now with our donors. So a few key considerations to keep in mind. Again, this work is not necessarily easy. It can take time. It does require quite a bit of work and support within the organization to take it on. So you do want to make sure, first and foremost, that you have the capacity, right? If you are a single person plan giving shop, you're going to need help, right? So not to say that you shouldn't do this work, it's probably even more critical that you do, but that you engage your other colleagues to support you in that. And then, to understand, and this is part of building gift planning culture, right? How can you bring in more of the fundraising staff to support this particular effort? Who puts together your annual development plan? Should this be a part of that process? Are you in the midst of that in the lead up to your end of your fiscal year, beginning of the following fiscal year? This is a mid-year point for a lot of organizations with regard to their fiscal year schedule. Maybe now is a good time, right, to start to think about and start to investigate what's going on sort of, under the hood with regard to your donors, so that you can be ready to factor that into plans in the last quarter before your fiscal year ends. Do you have the time to do this work? Do your colleagues have the time? How is that going to work, right? And over what period of time? Is this a very acute need where you need this information more quickly, or is it a longer term project? Can you build this into work that's already ongoing within your organization, either because you're in the midst of a strategic plan, you are planning for a campaign, or maybe you've completed a campaign recently and you want to do sort of a post-campaign assessment? Any of those opportunities, as well as many others, are great times to engage in this type of work. And then lastly, think about who would be beneficial to you in this process. Would you need some sort of partner, right, to help you get through this work, either because it'll just give you more capacity, so you'll get through it more quickly, to provide additional insights, maybe different from what you might have already, or if there's other considerations at play. And then here's how we go about it, right? So when we work with our nonprofit partners, we're looking to, again, understand specifically the potential within their plan giving program. We look at it in these categories, in these buckets, if you will, right? So first, we have to know, what does the data tell us, right? Hopefully you're tracking good data. That's the first part. Hopefully you're tracking good data. Hopefully it's being tracked consistently, and that you're able to extract it easily. That's not always the case. So we do also offer services to help with both data analysis as well as systems assessments to understand how to get the most out of your database. And then once we get that data, then we're just looking at, baseline understanding. Who's giving? How frequently? When was their last gift? What's their total giving? How many years have they been giving total? How many years consistently? What types of gifts are they giving? What are the sources of their gifts? All of those questions, right, hopefully is being tracked in the data so that we can start to build a picture of who your plan giving prospects are. And again, not just your deferred gift prospects, not just your legacy gift prospects, but also prospects that might be primed for a conversation about, how to leverage their stock portfolios, or they're of an age where it might be worth a conversation to determine how are they using their IRA distributions. Could that be a QCD that they might make to your organization? Then we also, there's different approaches to this. It can be very simple through an RFM analysis, can be much more complex. We do have a data analytics team, so we do provide and build out donor models and predictive modeling based on the information we have. And for those of our nonprofit partners that don't have it, we have our own that we built. So we then apply that just as a starting point, right? This is directive, just to give you a sense of where to go. And then based on information, we segment the donors and understand, who are going to be the best targets for a direct mail campaign, who are going to be the best targets for a one-on-one conversation, what about small groups, who's ideal for legacy society conversations, and so forth. So we have all of that data. We know who we're going to talk to with regard to donors and how we're going to communicate with them, how we're going to educate them, right, on the ways that plan giving can be beneficial to them as well as to our organization. The next thing we have to do is we have to figure out what are our goals, what are our broader goals across the organization? Again, pointing back to any strategic plan that might exist. Beyond that, are there more, acute or timely goals that we need to tie into? And based on those goals, we build our fundraising plans, and then we build benchmarks based on various timelines. But essentially, we start with 12 months to be as detailed as we can, month by month, quarter by quarter. What are the benchmarks we need to hit? And it's not just money, right? A lot of times it's activity. What are the activity benchmarks we need? Because if we're meeting with donors, if we are communicating with donors, then we are going to see results. Then we build out from there, maybe 1 or 2 years from that point, slightly less detail, but still pretty well formed. We want to make sure we're building in time for review as well, thoughtful analysis of how what we're doing is having an impact or not, so we can make adjustments. And then we look at 3 to 5 years, right? And the goals there, the benchmarks might be a little less specific, maybe much more broad. Maybe we're just looking like quarterly plans at that point. But again, we have a timeline and benchmarks to measure our success against. In terms of donor engagement, we look really deeply into the marketing and communications. One thing that we do when we're working with an organization is to understand how their plan giving program exists in relation to annual and major giving. Because again, a lot of times plan giving is baby in the corner, right? It's not really integrated with the other two, which makes them thinking about how are we thoughtfully communicating with our donors relative to how gift planning culture can support them and help them realize their financial and philanthropic goals, often gets lost, gets caught up in the constant drumbeat, necessarily so, of asking for support for our organization. So we look into that. We look into not only how are we marketing, but more importantly, how are we communicating? Again, from the Leaving a Legacy report, there was a point about, I think it was like 41% of donors first learned about a plan giving option from their charity, not from their financial advisor or their estate planner, from their nonprofit, right? So we have a huge responsibility to make sure that we are providing as much information to our donors so that they can be knowledgeable about what options are available to them. And not only, again, how they can support our mission, but how they can support their own personal financial and personal goals. And then we look at stewardship. Okay, plan giving donors typically, and again, we're talking about deferred legacy donors specifically, they don't need a lot of stewardship, but it needs to be consistent and it needs to be thoughtful. So just as an example, it could be that, there's, and I know most of you that are practitioners are thinking about this already, you could have a newsletter, and that's great. That's a really wonderful tool to use to share donor stories and updates about the organization. But what's something that's really personal that you can send to each of your legacy donors? Is it a handwritten note on the date that they confirm their gift, thanking them for making that commitment? Is it a note to them on their birthday? Is it, some other personal touch like that? Possibly, right? And that's what we look to uncover when we think about donor engagement. And then underpinning all of this is resourcing. How is this work going to get done? For our philanthropic advisors, which one of my gift planning colleagues alerted me to, probably a better term for how we view fundraisers. Can we be advisors for philanthropy? I think so. How are we supporting their professional development so that they can help our donors give their best gift, continue to give their best gift even after they've made a legacy gift to our organization? Do you have an advisor network within your local community? And we're talking estate planning attorneys, tax professionals, financial advisors, all of those individuals that really help an individual or a family understand their wealth, their assets, and how to leverage it, in addition to your support as a philanthropic advisor. And this network also can be helpful for you, right? Thinking about going back to what we heard in our landscape survey that, do our practitioners who are not plan giving experts, do they have the knowledge? Again, my guess is they do. By our experience, they really do have the knowledge. They just don't have the confidence. So if you can build an advisor network to support your colleagues as well, that's going to help them help you as also. And then external partnerships, right? And this could be through some of the third-party marketing firms like Stelter or Crescendo, or some of the others. It could be consulting firms like CCS or others. So again, what other partnerships do you need to help make your plan give, really draw out the most you can out of your plan giving prospects? Okay. All right, so now I'm making the case for greater investment, right? So there is many different ways that we can go about this. The hope is, at least through the conversations we have had to this point, right, the information shared, that we understand, we're all sort of on the same playing field in terms of the terms. We understand the philanthropic landscape and the potential that exists, because then we understand what we need to be looking for within our own communities, within our own donor communities, to understand how then do we leverage that? How do we empower our donors to make the most of the assets that they have in support of our mission? One of the things we like to think about when making the case for greater investment is we have to be able to anticipate the questions, right? What are the concerns that we're going to hear from the leadership about why this may or may not be the best time to invest in planned giving? So thanks to all of you that responded to that question and when you registered. What was one thing that you heard that, in terms of why it's not a good time to invest in planned giving? So we'll share some of those with you. They basically fall into three broad categories. So the first is, we cannot invest in planned giving because we need to prioritize annual and major gifts to get dollars in the door, right? It's that immediate need concern. We need revenue now. We're in the midst of a capital campaign. We have a building to build, right? Planned gifts take too long. We won't realize these gifts for years. I mean, you all know this, right? You shared these comments with us, and we will echo them back to you as the number one reason why we hear, some hesitation from some of our nonprofit partners about investing in planned giving. So how can we respond to that? Provide three suggestions for how to respond. The first is to highlight non-cash assets that are cash in a different form, right? So this is stocks, this is IRA QCDs, this is even real estate, right? Real estate is not going to be immediate in the way that a stock gift is, but it still can be realized much sooner than a bequest, right? So what are those other non-cash assets that you can leverage in that way and bring to your leadership to say, look, if we increase, again, going back to Dr. James's study, if we can increase our gifts of securities by 10%, we could see growth of X%, right? And that's real, right? That is from 990s. That is documented growth. I will also say a tip that I learned from a friend who for many, many years led a very successful planned giving shop with a Northeast university, is that when you have conversations with your leadership and you're sharing with them, bequests or any type of deferred gift, it's cash, it's future cash, right? We're not going to talk about bequests or deferred gifts or trusts or any of that. This is my future cash pipeline. Also, here's my immediate cash pipeline, right? For all of those immediate use gifts that are coming in. And again, let's take ownership as planned giving practitioners on those asset types that we know fall within that category of non-cash assets, but can be liquidated into cash much more quickly. Own that. And then we have a much fuller story to tell that shows both sides of the coin. We also know from Dr. James that annual giving increases, right? So pretty dramatically after a donor adds a charity to their estate plan, annual donations are consistently over 75% higher, right? So that speaks right to that concern that, this is going to cannibalize annual giving, or how can we possibly ask for legacy gifts when we just need to make our annual goal every year? This is a way to do that. Right. And it makes sense when you think about the psychology of a donor who's made a legacy gift specifically about how they're going to feel about your organization in the shorter term. If they're committed to you in the long term and they put you in their will with their family, then they're always going to want to see you succeed in the short term. So now you've got them engaged in two ways, much more deeply, much more rooted, I would say, than previously. We also know, again, from Dr. James, that major gift propensity increases after a donor has made a legacy gift. And the 2 years after that gift, there's a 17% increase in a donor's propensity to make a major gift. And these are qualified as $10,000 and above. And after 10 years, it increases to 22%. So again, we see that planned giving, specifically deferred gifts, legacy gifts, only serve to tie a donor closer to your organization and increase their giving, both in terms of annual and major gifts. The second major concern that we hear, broadly speaking, is about the donors. In this case, from one of you, that your donor base isn't old enough. They're not thinking about planned giving right now. That's not necessarily true, right? Again, pointing back to those data points from leaving a legacy. Mid 40s for the creation of the first will, and early 50s for the first charity being added to that will. That's usually decades younger than most board members and even most organizational leaders are thinking about a planned giving donor. So there's a lot of work that we have to do, not only in terms of educating our donors about what plan giving means and how it can benefit them, but also internally with our own leadership, right? About what plan giving is, what a modern plan giving donor looks like. They are younger, they are very, very savvy, and they know how to use the tools that they have at their disposal to make pretty impressive philanthropic investments. So how to respond to whatever quote unquote the ideal donor is. I mean, I would say actually certainly share the findings from Leaving a Legacy. If you don't have that report, highly, highly recommend downloading it from Giving USA. Second, know your donor base, right? Hopefully you've done some amount of data analysis, donor analysis to be able to understand who your donors are. And that goes for not only how much they're giving, but how old are they? You know, if you're not tracking ages, now's the time to start. It's going to be helpful to you to segment, to be able then to target your messaging even more specifically. But you have to know who's giving, and you have to know when, right? When was their first gift to you? At what age? And what was the trajectory of their giving over the following X number of years, 5 years, 7 years, 10 years? What does that look like? That's your own best marker for how your program could potentially grow in the future. And then lastly, consider life stages, donor life stages, as opportunities to open the plan giving conversation, right? So if you are a religious organization, you know, think about weddings, think about baptisms, you know, if you're a church, you know, even funerals, you know, can be an opportunity. There's obviously a lot more sensitivity around that conversation, but it is an opportunity if it's being done thoughtfully and with the donor's interests at heart. But that, you know, it's going to be different for every organization depending on the sector, right? Higher ed has a very different relationship to their donors than arts and culture, but there are some similarities. So understand and get to know, like, what are the life stages that are coming up for your donors that you can use to be able to share with them how plan giving could be of benefit to them. And then just for the you know, for our purposes today, the third reason why we cannot invest in plan giving, we don't have the internal expertise to manage this. Again, not necessarily true. So first thing I would say is invest in your fundraisers, invest in your philanthropic advisors. There are so many free resources that exist in plan giving. It is an exceptionally, as I'm sure many of you on the webinar today know, it is an exceptionally generous community, right? So look into all of the resources that exist. We have some on our website. Many of the third-party vendors that we work with our nonprofit partners have them as well. There's no reason not to encourage that for your fundraisers. And then also provide a budget for them to do other things. Maybe it's a certification or a specialized training or to go to a conference. There's so many opportunities, and it really won't cost the organization that much, but the return, both in terms of what it will bring for your philanthropic advisor in terms of their confidence and then their ability to put those skills to use, combined with what it means then for them to feel that investment in your organization, from your organization rather, is immeasurable. Also consider what plan giving options you, specifically your organization, can focus on. Again, if and when you assess your program, you will probably pretty easily determine which direction you need to go, right? We're going to focus on bequests and QCDs based on what we know about our donor base, or we're going to focus on stock gifts and increasing our real estate gifts, or we just want to focus on an education campaign for this year and the next year where we're going to hit bequests and stock gifts and QCDs, you know, with a lot of intentionality. Totally depends, but decide what you can do, and the data will pretty much always reveal to you where the opportunity is to begin now, and then you build from there. And then lastly, promote and reward collaboration within your staff, and not just within the fundraising staff, but think about program staff as well. I used to work for Alvin Ailey Dance Foundation and didn't realize until many years after I left just how incredible an experience it was, because not only was the development team incredibly collaborative with our other colleagues in the foundation in marketing and PR, so we can have really, you know, really strong, comprehensive engagement of our donors, but also with our program staff in the Ailey School and with the two companies, the two dance companies. And it was those partnerships that allowed us to be able to connect with our donors and to provide them giving opportunities that were incredibly meaningful to the donors. So be really generous, right? Encourage generosity internally with how we are rewarding all of our colleagues to connect and collaborate with each other. Because at the end of the day, it's all in support of the mission. Okay. All right, so quick recap, and then we will open it up for questions. I think there might be some in the chat already. And again, the whole point of this deck, and you'll receive it after our webinar today, is to be able to use it to initiate the conversation with your leadership, right? To just begin to highlight for them some of the data points and the opportunities for determining the potential within your organization that will hopefully elicit a positive response to why to invest in plan giving. But if all else fails, this slide hopefully will be the one that you can take and print out and take to your next meeting. So growth, right? Organizations that are pursuing assets other than cash, they're growing. Those that are focused on cash only, they're not growing. If anything, they're falling behind because of inflation. So we have to stay on top of this. Organizations create a much more sustainable revenue pipeline when you focus on non-cash assets, in addition to cash, right? It has to be both. It's not an either and or either or. Larger gifts, again, focus on how wealth is held in our country. We want to be able to open up for our donors to expand their thinking. And it truly is a psychological shift for them to think about giving from their wealth rather than from their disposable income, right? We don't want to necessarily be a bill that they're focused on at the end of the month. We want them to think about how they can give to us from all that they have, not just what they're, what they have in their checkbook. Gifts of non-cash assets make it easier for donors to give. Cash is going to be kept close. So we want to, again, start to open it up for our donors, the idea of there's other ways to give that won't impact you necessarily sort of your day-to-day living. The generational wealth transfer is huge. And again, I firmly believe that if we shift how we're fundraising, and it doesn't have to be a big shift, but a subtle shift even, and how we are approaching this conversation with our donors will help to unlock the opportunity for our donors to, again, think about their wealth relative to philanthropic investment. We also want to continue to lean into gift planning as a way to democratize philanthropy. Again, going back to the data from Giving USA, that nearly a third of all bequests came from estates of less than $1 million. It's huge, right? It's a huge opportunity for many, many families to be able to give a gift that they could never give in life, right? They could never give a gift that large in life, but they can as part of their legacy. We want to encourage that. We also want to think about what it would mean to engage Black and Brown donors in this way of giving, which typically they're not giving at the same level as their white counterparts. The thinking, and again, I learned this from Dr. James, is that really might more than likely come down to needing more support, more help in finding a professional advisor, right? So if your organization doesn't already have a list, again, going back to that advisor network of people in your community who you can lean on, but who you might also even be able to refer your donors to, just to initiate that conversation, you need to. I will offer that one of the clients I'm working with right now did this. We encouraged them to do it. They did it. And since then, there's been, a few donors that have come to them to say, I really want to put your organization in my will, but I don't even have a will. I don't know where to start. So then their fundraisers, their philanthropic advisors are able to give them a list. Here is a list of estate planning attorneys in our community, right? We're not advocating for these folks, but here's a list. Here's also, some questions that you need to ask, some questions when you're vetting this person, just to see if it's going to be the right fit. And now what those philanthropic advisors can do is when they follow up with the donor, it's not to say, have you created a will? It's to say, did any of those estate planning attorneys, did you schedule any meetings? Did you have any conversations? Are there any questions I can answer for you, right? You're giving them something to help them give you something in return. So that's something we found to be really helpful. And then finally, again, in that same vein, it's just building a true partnership with your donors. Another of our colleagues in the practice group said this some time ago, and it's just always stuck with me, right? That gift planning at its essence, gift planning culture, is not only what we ask from our donors, but it's what we can do for our donors. So I like to think about that in terms of everything that we do, and to truly think about shifting philanthropy in a way that I think really will have, really amazing impacts for our organizations and really the whole sector for years down the road, as we see more and more donors at younger and younger ages opening themselves to wanting to invest in nonprofits in pretty significant ways. So with that, I'm going to share this last little photo, which I think is just so sweet, right? That whole idea of bloom where you're planted. We're going to have to take what we have, in our unique situations and just make the most of it. But I hope the information that I've shared today gives you some direction to go with regard to having that conversation with your leadership, at the very least, some data points that you were reminded of, or maybe even learned for the first time, that will be helpful in that conversation. So I want to open it up now to Q&A and to chat. Let me do a quick time check. Let's see. We have about 15 minutes or so. So let's go ahead and make sure that, yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to pop them in the chat. Thank you so much. I see there's some questions already. Yep. So Sarah had asked if there are any stats on the percentage of real estate or retirement assets that end up in philanthropy. My colleague Christopher shared a link there. All right. Penny asked, do you have examples of how to promote and reward internal collaboration? That's a great question, Penny. So I can share from some of our nonprofit partners, thinking about whatever goals, excuse me, you have set for your fundraisers. One way that you can promote that is offering your fundraisers or your philanthropic advisors 100% credit for a gift, even if it's a deferred gift, right? There's no reason not to. They work to bring that gift in. When that gift comes in, is less relevant, but that also then has to do with how the organization is counting gifts. So we also advocate for following CGP standards, right? That you have outright gifts, revocable deferred, and irrevocable deferred, so that they're put in the correct bucket. And then of course, those deferred gifts are counted as future cash. And then the outright gifts are current or immediate use cash. So that's one way that we found is helpful. I would also think about, some more simple things you can do. Just, when you're bringing your philanthropic advisors together, and hopefully you are, on a regular basis to review their portfolios, to encourage conversation amongst them, and also thinking about, as one of your metrics, blended proposals, right? So if you're fortunate enough, your organization is fortunate enough to have a plan giving expert or even a team, right? How many blended proposals is that person or that team working on with the other philanthropic advisors, right? And make that a metric that everybody's responsible for, because that's also, right, in the best interest of our donor, to be able to give them in one place all of the requests that we're making of them in any given period of time. Okay. And then Shauna asked, are there any favorite free resources you can share? Well, that's a softball question, Shauna. Obviously, anything on the CCS website. But beyond that, let's see. Stelter has amazing resources, webinars, documents, reports, things like that. Free Will also is coming out with some really great stuff. I'll leave it to my colleagues as well to chime in if there's anything that they're particularly interested in. But, Crescendo for marketing tips is wonderful. PG Calc has really solid resources. I'm sure there's others. Those are just the ones that are sort of off the top of my head. Charitable gift planners. Yep. Yeah. CGP, obviously, huge resource. Thanks, Christopher. Also want a quick note. Oh, thank you, Abigail. Yep. Sharing from the LA CGP Council. That's a really great council as well. One of my colleagues, Jeremy, just wanted to make a note. Correction, actually. So according to the 2022 DAF report, there's more than 234 billion in DAFs right now. So talk about that exponential growth. Still not in the trillions. So the figure we have is a bit old, but we'll need to update that. But just so you know, 234 for DAFs as of the 2022 report. So a few more questions. So Sarah's asking about the Giving USA. Was it Giving USA that has a Leaving a Legacy report? Yes, that is a Giving USA report, absolutely. And do you need a subscription? I don't think so. I think you have to purchase it, but I don't think you need a subscription, Sarah. Does anybody know? Jeremy or Christopher, Paige? Okay.
Checking right now.
Thanks, Jeremy.
Thank
All right. Anyone can buy. Thanks, Jeremy. All right, so Penny, and you know what, I'm actually going to end the screen share, so just bear with me just a moment. There we go. All right, so you can see some of my colleagues there on the screen, possibly. So Penny asked the question, you mentioned shifting the conversation related to the generational wealth transfer. Any specific examples about how to dig into that? I have some thoughts, but I'll open it up to my colleagues if anyone has any initial thoughts. So one of the things that I'll offer, Penny, first of all, you have to know what ages your donors are. That's important, right? So understanding who your donors are and at what ages they are. And then, there's a lot of great reports out there in terms of generationally how donors are giving. I think it's also important for us to remind our leadership, which typically skews a bit older, that, for instance, millennials, right? The elder millennials are in their 40s, early 40s, but they're in their 40s, right? So they're not kids anymore, which means that Gen Z following, right? So Gen Z is now fully, out of college. They are working and, beginning to think about giving as well in their own special way. Also, just a reminder that, oh gosh, I don't even remember the next generation. What's the generation after Z? Do you remember? Alpha. I don't know if it's Alpha. The next generation, that one of their members was just elected to the House of Representatives. So again, we have to also think about, just understanding how are these younger generations being engaged, because they're giving very differently than their parents and grandparents. The other thing that I'll mention in terms of shifting the conversation, Penny, is, and I would do this, very, very targeted to start, is for donors that you are closer to, particularly older donors, and if they have, adult children or even young adult children, to ask them if they want to include their children in these types of conversations. They may say no, but they might also really jump at the chance, because they, especially if they're a high net worth or ultra high net worth family, they very likely are looking for ways to engage their children in those types of conversations, but haven't perhaps necessarily found an easy way to do that. They might also, maybe they have a family foundation, or maybe they even have a DAF. So those conversations might be happening, but chances are not within the confines of a nonprofit specifically. So again, it's a unique place that we hold, and being able to ask for those conversations and then sit with the donor and their families to talk about this, what it means to give, and to your organization, and making sure the children understand what that mission is, right? That's going to be really important if the parents or the grandparents are your primary donors right now, and getting the younger generations to understand why they're giving to you and why it's so important to them. So those are just a few ideas. Sarah also shared, and here I'll pop this into the chat for everyone. The Johnson Center is doing some great work and research on this front. So I'm assuming about next gen donors. Yeah. Another thing I'll say about sort of generational thinking and giving, younger donors are by far better, or maybe more adept at giving cryptocurrency than older donors. So if your organization isn't giving crypto, and I know there's a lot of questions around crypto these days, but certainly something to consider, because that again is a non-cash asset that is essentially cash, right? So there's a lot of resources for that as well. I think about the giving block comes to mind. I know there's some others that'll come up as well. Yeah, especially if you sell immediately. That's right, Jeremy. You don't want to hold on to that.
I think also, Angel, to answer that question on the, how to have that conversation, is I think it's just asking the right questions. It's engaging them and finding out, why were they involved with your organization to begin with? What inspires them to give? You had mentioned, do you talk to your family about this? Who should be a part of future conversations? I mean, I think just asking those backward thinking questions, and, why they're a part of it, and forward thinking questions as to, what else is out there that, they might be interested in, and are they having those dialogues? I think I go right back to, instead of talking to them, letting them talk to us and tell us what they're thinking and what they're hearing.
Yeah. Yeah. Great point, Jeremy. Thank you.
I also think that if they have a business, if there's a lot of family business, like I have a current client who's engaged in a conversation with a donor, and the business, they build houses, the children are involved. Obviously in the business, there's open-ended questions about, like, what's the future plan? When does the transition happen? Is this business is there any opportunity, thought process in terms of, is it going to be sold in the future? Just curiosity of how the business was shaped, and the things like current situations, is specifically with housing. What are their thoughts about the industry that they work in? All of that is information and data that you can collect and, more importantly, record, and get them talking more about themselves, to Jeremy's point, but not just about their philanthropy, what they do on a day-to-day basis that kind of identifies them a little bit differently.
Thanks, Christopher. Jennifer asks, will a replay be sent? Absolutely. Yep, we'll share out the recording and the slide deck following the webinar, so you all can have it. And again, I hope the slide deck, if nothing else, will be useful, hopefully in conversations, or as you're preparing for the conversation about how to request investment in your plan giving program. Okay. Last chance for questions, or if there's anything that warrants clarification that we shared today, happy to share out that. If anyone has any resources, feel free to pop it into the chat for everyone. Thanks to those that have already shared. Great. Michelle's asking if anyone in the chat, has anyone had experience with MarketSmart surveys for prospect identification? Would love to chat. And she shared her email address. So if you've worked with MarketSmart, feel free to reach out to Michelle. Michelle, I'm also happy to, we can check with our colleagues. I'm pretty sure we have some colleagues that have had nonprofit partners that have used MarketSmart. From my perspective, just what I know of the organization and their work, it's pretty interesting stuff. I mean, it's AI, right? So being able to engage on that level and sort of follow, the donor's interests and then follow up based on how they've connected with you on your website and the questions they've answered is pretty interesting to me. So thanks to anyone who can help out Michelle with her questions there. Oh, there you go, Shalita. So you're making connections already. This is what gift planning is all about. So Michelle, just want to point out, Shalita put in the chat that she is using MarketSmart. So reach out to Shalita. Lisa's asking, is there a link to the Giving USA Leaving a Legacy Report, C1 from 2019? That is the one, Lisa. It is at this point a few years old, but it is absolute gold. So enjoy. All right, folks. Well, thanks again for joining us today.